Julian Cross had been a diplomat for just over 4 years when he discovered two things in rapid succession. First, that the galaxy was far stranger than any academy briefing had prepared him for, and second, that vampires were not a myth. They were a diplomatic category. The revelation arrived during what Ambassador Richardson optimistically called a cultural interaction protocol review. Anyone else would have called it what it truly was: a list of ways to avoid provoking powerful beings who did not share human ideas about forgiveness. Richardson tapped a holographic display, revealing a figure that made half the room's breath catch. Countess Valora of House Noctis, he said solemnly. She represents the shadow worlds of the Outer Veil, 6 centuries old, last surviving heir to her line. Julian studied the rotating hologram. Even the projection held an almost gravitational pull. Her skin resembled polished obsidian. Her hair shimmered like captured starlight, and her crimson eyes glowed with an inner luminescence that made every instinct scream predator. She would have looked elven, graceful, almost regal, if not for the unmistakable edge of danger beneath every line. She has ended for emissaries, Richardson continued, voice flat. 2 for violating protocol, 1 for lying, and 1, he hesitated. We still don't know. Whatever he said didn't survive him. Julian regretted opening his mouth before the words even left it. What kind of joke was it? Richardson went pale. The final kind, apparently. The room shifted uneasily. Julia Martinez, chief trade negotiator, cleared her throat and began reviewing survival tactics like someone listing instructions for bomb disposal. Do not approach her. Do not initiate eye contact. Don't attempt physical greeting. She interprets touch as a challenge. Don't reference her age, blood, mortality, or sunlight. Don't breathe too loudly. Julian muttered before he could stop himself. A few diplomats snickered. Richardson did not. This isn't humor, Cross. House Noctis feeds on fear chemically. Emotionally, they taste it. If she decides you're weak, she won't waste her time destroying you personally. One word from her can end careers. Julian nodded, trying to mimic confidence he did not feel. But diplomacy was performance. Pretending to be calm was half the job. Pretending to understand species that experience time in spirals instead of lines was the other half. For the next hour, the briefing cycled through every major species attending the Crystal Spire Summit. The winged Kestros, the methane-breathing giants of Titan's Hope, the crystalline collectives whose refracted bodies hurt to look at too long. Yet, without fail, every discussion eventually circled back to the Countess, always accompanied by warnings. 17 months of groundwork undone because someone said her presence was intimidating. Martinez said, pulling up a footage clip. 30 seconds later she stood, walked out, and the negotiations died. Was she actually intimidating? Julian asked. Doesn't matter, Martinez replied. You don't tell a 600-year-old apex predator. She unsettles you. Later, walking alone through the Crystal Spire's winding corridors, Julian tried to push the warnings from his mind. The station was breathtaking. Crystalline walls refracting light into colors no Earth language named, architecture built by minds that didn't think in straight lines. Delegates of a dozen species drifted through the halls like living currents. A silver-feathered Kestrel elder spotted him in an observation lounge. First summit, she asked gently. Is it that obvious? You still look at the ships with wonder, she said with a laugh. Give it time. That fades. Her warmth eases nerves, but only briefly, because that night, reviewing the seating chart for tomorrow's grand session, he noticed a single detail in the margins. Seat beside him, unassigned. Attendance fluctuates. Julian stared at it for a long moment. There was only one delegate who never pre-claimed her seat. Only one who made entire rows empty themselves. Tomorrow, she would choose her place. And if she chose the seat beside him, no briefing had ever told him what to do then. The Grand Hall of the Crystal Spire was the kind of place that made Julian feel like gravity was optional and geometry was negotiable. The ceiling spiraled upward into angles that his eyes insisted shouldn't exist, yet somehow did. Light flowed rather than shone, bending and refracting through crystalline pillars in shifting hues that painted the gathered delegates in alien colors. Julian found his assigned seat, middle section, good view, unremarkably positioned. Diplomatic purgatory. Except for one detail. The entire row of seats to his right sat conspicuously empty. At first, he didn't understand. This was the most important interstellar summit in decades. No one skipped seating opportunities. But then a human diplomat approached, hesitating near the chair beside Julian. "Is that seat taken?" he asked. "No, it's open," Julian replied. The man took one look down the long line of vacant seats and blanched, suddenly remembering urgent business, 3 rows back. Julian exhaled slowly. Not on assigned seats. A buffer zone, reserved for the one delegate no one would sit beside willingly. Around him, the hall filled with beings from worlds that would have sounded like fairy tales a century ago. A crystalline collective member settled into a refractor chair, their light-woven bodies shimmering. A trio from the water worlds floated in mobile tanks, bioluminescence pulsing in complex patterns. The Kestros arrive in a rustle of ceremonial flight feathers. Even through all the noise, Julian felt a strange emptiness press in from his right side. Ambassador Richardson caught his eye across the hall and gave him a tight nod that meant behave. Julia Martinez gestured a quick breathe before diving into rapid pre-session diplomacy. Then the temperature dropped. Not a draft. Not a glitch in climate control. A sudden, precise 3-degree plunge, like the air itself remembering winter. The conversation in the hall didn't fade. It vanished. Every delegate froze with uncanny synchronicity. Even the crystalline beings stilled their refractive pulses. Julian knew before he looked. Countess Valora stood in the entrance. The hologram had not prepared him for the reality of her. Darkness clung to her like it obeyed her instead of physics. Her gown shifted between black, wine red, and starless void as she moved. Her hair floated as if influenced by a breeze that touched no one else. And those crimson eyes, ancient luminous, swept across the hall with the bored patience of someone who'd witnessed empires rise and collapse in the time it took humans to debate tax law. Julian stared at his datapad, rereading a sentence on lithium tariffs 5 times without absorbing a single word. "Don't look up," he muttered to himself. "Don't engage. Don't." Footsteps approached. Soft, precise, final. They stopped beside him. "This seat is available." Her voice was nothing like he expected. Not cold, not harsh. Smooth and dangerous, velvet wrapped around sharpened glass. Julian looked up. Protocol screamed no. Instinct screamed run. But ignoring a direct question from a political powerhouse was its own form of suicide. "Yes, Countess," he managed. "It's unclaimed." A flicker across her expression. Surprise? Interest? It was gone before he could name it. "How unusual," she murmured. "Everyone else evacuated these seats the moment I entered. My instructions said not to approach you," Julian said before his brain could stop him. "They didn't say what to do if you approached me." The hall collectively flinched, entire species reacting at once, as if bracing for a detonation. Valora stared at him for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity stretched thin. Then she laughed. A genuine, startled, delighted laugh. Delegates twitched. A crystalline being refracted so violently a rainbow shot across the hall. "Clever," she said, taking the seat beside him with graceful finality. An honest, an increasingly rare combination. Julian tried not to pass out. As the opening ceremonies began, a holographic coordinator materialized at the central podium, offering diplomatic platitudes about unity and prosperity. Valora leaned in slightly, a subtle motion, yet Julian felt every nerve in his body notice. "How much of that do you think is sincere?" she whispered. "About 60% optimism," Julian murmured back. 40% contractual obligation to sound inspiring. She sounded genuinely amused. Generous. I would have said 30-70. One by one, delegations rose to introduce themselves. Valora quietly critiqued each. Heart rates, lies, cultural tendencies, offering sharp insights with casual ease. When Earth's delegation stood, Richardson delivered their prepared message. Valora's eyes never left Julian. By the time House Noctis was announced last, the hall was silent again. Valora rose, her presence commanding without effort. "House Noctis seeks what it has always sought," she declared. profitable partnerships with the wise, and stability in the outer veil. No threats, no theatrics, yet somehow more intimidating than both. She sat. The room exhaled. Not very diplomatic, Julian whispered. I prefer honesty, she replied. Threats are tedious. She summoned a slim data device, projecting a small holographic chessboard between them. We have hours ahead. Play with me. Julian stared. Chess? Now! Better than listening to another speech about shipping lane harmony, she said dryly. Your move. Julian didn't consider himself a strong chess player. Competent, maybe, capable of not embarrassing himself on a good day, but playing in front of an entire hall of delegates and next to a 600-year-old vampire diplomat who could probably predict his moves before he even thought them was something else entirely. Still, refusing her invitation felt like a significantly worse idea. He moved a pawn. Valora responded immediately, her fingers gliding through projection with unhurried precision. I haven't played an opponent who might surprise me in decades, she said. Don't disappoint me too quickly. No pressure, Julian muttered. Around them. The hall resumed its diplomatic grind. Delegates argued politely, then less politely, then not even vaguely politely. Resource disputes, shipping lanes, territorial rights. It all merged into a familiar melody of bureaucratic combat. Valora didn't bother pretending to care. She studied the board with an expression that suggested she was also studying him. Why diplomacy? She asked casually. Humans usually enter this field seeking influence or prestige. You don't radiate either. Julian nudged his knight forward, scanning the board like someone trying to anticipate a natural disaster. I grew up in reconstruction zones after the resource wars. I saw what happened when people stopped talking and started shooting. Figured negotiation was the better option. Ah, Valora murmured, sliding her bishop with elegant precision. Idealism. Dangerous hobby. Says the apex predator playing friendly chess. Julian said before he could stop himself. Her lips curved minutely. Touché. The board glowed softly between them, pieces shifting under ancient and inexperienced hands. For a moment, Julian forgot about the hall, the summit, the consequences. He was simply playing a game with someone impossibly old and unexpectedly curious. Then the first diplomatic explosion detonated. The Kestro's delegation accused the methane breathers of predatory pricing. The methane breathers retaliated with a chemical burst that, once translated, roughly equated to, "Spare us your sanctimony." Someone from the Waterworlds inadvertently flashed a bioluminescent insult that would have sparked a war 5 decades ago. The hall dissolved into multilingual chaos. Julian stopped mid-move. This is bad. This is standard, Valora corrected, leaning back as though watching a mildly entertaining stage play. Every summit has one early meltdown, a ritual like weather or volcanic activity. A ritual that could collapse the entire conference, Julian hissed. It won't, Valora said with absolute certainty. Someone will posture dramatically. Tensions will cool, and then everyone will pretend progress was made. It's practically scripted. One of the Kestros knocked over 3 data pads in a flurry of indignant feathers. A methane breather's containment suit rattled with fury. A crystalline collective member began refracting defensive patterns, throwing prismatic shards of light across the hall. Still scripted? Julian whispered. Valora sighed, stood, and the room froze so instantly Julian felt the silence land like a physical weight. All eyes turned. She didn't speak loudly. She didn't need to. The Kestros hold legitimate claim to historical 3 extraction, Valora said. Titan's hope is correct that current market conditions are restrictive. Both arguments are valid. Both are relevant. The methane breathers emitted a confused ripple of chemical signals. You are fighting over a resource pool that is already insufficient, Valora continued. Demand is rising beyond existing infrastructure. Competing over scarcity is foolish. Julian blinked. That was blunt, even for her. I propose a joint extraction initiative, she said, sweeping the room with her crimson gaze. New facilities in the outer belts. The Kestros contribute infrastructure. Titan's Hope contributes deep coal machinery. Profit split weighted by investment. She sat, perfectly casual, as if she hadn't just resolved a dispute that had simmered for months. The room shifted. Arguments dwindled. Holographic models sprang to life, showing potential mines, transport routes, cost projections. "You just saved the summit," Julian whispered. "I saved my mining investments," Valora replied dryly. "Chaos is expensive." She flicked her gaze to the chessboard. "You were about to lose your queen." "I was hoping you'd forget that," Julian said. "I forget nothing," she replied. "It's incredibly inconvenient." Their pieces continued shifting as the hall gradually returned to civility. Delegates debated details instead of hurling accusations. Even Ambassador Richardson seemed cautiously optimistic, if also deeply alarmed by Julian's proximity to the Countess. After another 20 minutes of play, Valora paused mid-move. "Loneliness," she said suddenly. "That's what you saw earlier, not weakness." Julian looked up, startled. "I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said," she interrupted. It was disarming. For the first time, her voice carried no veneer of menace, just honesty. Julian exhaled. "It's not surrender to admit it. Everyone's lonely sometimes." Her expression shifted, unreadable, ancient, almost vulnerable. "You are a strange human," she murmured. "I get that a lot." She moved her queen with surgical precision. Check. The second day of the summit began with deceptive calm. The official schedule labeled the session resource allocation and sector equitability review, which, according to every veteran diplomat, translated to the part where tempers ignite like plasma fuel. Julian arrived early, unsure whether claiming the same seat beside Valora would seem respectful or presumptuous. But after yesterday's chaos, sitting anywhere else felt like cowardice wrapped in bureaucracy. So he took the same chair. Valora arrived moments later, her robes a deep, shifting violet that bled into black as she moved. Today her hair was woven into an elaborate pattern that probably carried 6 centuries of cultural nuance Julian didn't remotely understand. "You returned," she said. "You invited me yesterday," Julian replied. Seemed rude not to show up. "We finished our game," she said. "I won." "Yes, but you did claim we might play again. I might lose slightly less horribly this time." A faint expression, amusement, pride, something softer, crossed her face. She took the seat beside him. Across the hall, Ambassador Richardson watched the two of them like a man observing a civilian juggling grenades. Martinez whispered something urgently in his ear while scanning her datapad. "You're being stared at," Valora observed. "Your delegation leader appears to be attempting telepathic combustion." Julian sighed. "He's worried I'm being politically reckless." "Are you?" "A little," Julian admitted. "But apparently it's working." The session began, and immediately the room felt like a pressure cooker. The Kestros elder delivered a passionate speech about equitable resource distribution. Titan's Hope countered with accusations of monopolistic exploitation. Multiple methane breathers vented pressure through their suits, an unmistakable sign of agitation. Someone from the Waterworlds accidentally flashed a deeply inappropriate light pattern insult. Valora leaned in slightly. "I give this 5 minutes before someone threatens legal action," she whispered. 3, Julian countered. It took 2. What followed was less a discussion and more a diplomatic thunderstorm. Translators glitched trying to process overlapping arguments. Chairs scraped. Datapad slammed. Even the crystalline collective dimmed their refractions in irritation. Julian rubbed his temple. This is going to sink the whole summit. Valora exhaled a long, weary breath. It's tiresome watching the same argument replay every few years. She stood. Instant silence again. The air pressure seemed to shift. Even the walls hummed differently. She addressed him with the same effortless authority she had displayed the previous day, except this time there was steel beneath the velvet. "Your conflict is not about rights," she said. "It is about fear." That statement alone stunned the hall. "You fear losing control," she said to the Kestros. "And you," she said, turning toward Titan's Hope, Fear being locked out of market that sustains your world. You argue as though either of you can meet rising demand alone. Valora stepped forward, crimson eyes sweeping across the room. The truth is simple. You need each other. The methane breathers released a ripple of hesitation. The Kestro's elder shifted his feathers uneasily. Joint expansion into the outer belt, Valora continued. Shared investment, shared risk, shared reward. Your people survive because they adapt. Do so now. When she sat, the hall erupted, not in anger, but in frantic recalculations, whispered debates, urgent projections of potential output. It was a controlled storm now, redirected instead of destructive. You solve it again, Julian whispered. I nudged them, Valora said. The solution was obvious. They simply preferred shouting. She reopened the holographic chessboard. Now, your move. After all that, I'm supposed to think straight enough for chess. You weren't thinking clearly yesterday either, she said. It didn't help. He moved a knight. It was a terrible move. She smirked. While delegates restructured their negotiations, Valora briefly studied Julian with an intensity that made him sit straighter. You meant what you said yesterday, she said quietly. About loneliness. Yes. She looked away, not dismissively, but as though the view of the swirling crystalline lights was suddenly easier to face than him. 6 centuries, she murmured. 6 centuries of being feared, respected, avoided, yet never truly known. Julian hesitated. You don't have to be alone. Her hand hovered over the chessboard. That is the problem, Julian Cross. When you live long enough, attachment becomes risk. Loss becomes certainty. Doesn't mean connection isn't worth it, he said softly. Valora's expression went still, ancient, guarded, uncertain. Strange human, she whispered. You speak as though I haven't buried entire generations of those I cared for. I'm not asking you to stop grieving the past, Julian said. Just not to stop living because of it. For a long moment, neither moved. The summit hummed around them, frantic with new diplomatic energy. Finally, Valora touched the queen piece lightly. Check, she said. But this time, her voice was gentler. By the afternoon break, the summit had stabilized into something resembling actual diplomacy instead of imminent warfare. Delegates lingered in clusters, reviewing new projections inspired by Valora's intervention. The summit coordinator's hologram, which had flickered in distress earlier, now pulsed with cautious optimism. Julian stepped out into the corridor, needing a moment to breathe. Ambassador Richardson was waiting, arms crossed, jaw tight, the universal posture of a man preparing for a difficult conversation. We need to talk, Richardson said. Julian braced. About the resource agreements? No, Richardson's gaze sharpened. About your seating arrangement. Julian winced. Sir, she chose the seat. And you accepted, Richardson cut in. And then you spent 2 days sitting beside the single most politically volatile being in the hall, while playing chess and making her laugh. His voice dropped to a hiss. Do you have any idea how nervous the other delegations are about that? Julian tried not to smile at the idea that his presence could unsettle entire star systems. Sir, I wasn't trying to cause complications. But you did, Richardson said, rubbing his temple. Corporate interests on Earth are requesting full transcripts of every conversation you've had with her. Military intelligence wants a behavioral analysis. The diplomatic corps is split evenly between thinking you're a rising genius or a walking disaster. Julian groaned. With respect, sir, what would you have me do? Tell a 600-year-old vampire diplomat that I prefer she sits somewhere else? That feels like a fast track to becoming a cautionary story in future briefings. Richardson exhaled. I'm not ordering you to move seats. I'm telling you to be careful. Valora survived 6 centuries because nothing she does is accidental. If she's taking an interest in you, there's a reason. Julian knew that. He wasn't reckless enough to ignore it. But he also wasn't naive enough to assume every dangerous being had malicious motives. Understood, sir, he said quietly. I'll be cautious. Richardson nodded, still uneasy, and walked away. Julian returned to the hall. Valora sat waiting, her ancient data device in hand. She glanced up. "Your leader attempted to scold you," she observed. "You could hear that?" "I could feel it from across the corridor." Her mouth curved slightly. "Am I to expect you'll be relocating for political convenience?" Julian sat beside her, without hesitation. "No." For the first time since they'd met, Valora looked genuinely, almost imperceptibly, relieved. The next session focused on establishing new trade corridors beyond the Veil. The proposals were technical, full of gravitational charts, fuel cost matrices, and subtle interstellar politics. Julian found himself contributing more than he expected. He would point out structural inefficiencies in Earth's shipping processes. Valora would refine his points with centuries of logistical insight. Together, they crafted amendments that multiple factions accepted without argument. Word spread quickly. Delegates began glancing their way not with fear, but with tentative curiosity, even respect. Midway through the session, as a Crystalline Collective member outlined a new corridor route, Valora leaned toward him. "You are aware," she murmured, "that the room is adjusting to you." Julian blinked. "Adjusting? You're no longer being dismissed as a newcomer. They're listening." He hadn't realized until she said it, but she was right. The atmosphere around him had shifted. "Is that good?" he asked. "For them?" "Yes." Valora's eyes glowed faintly. "For you? Potentially dangerous." He swallowed. "And for you?" "Uncertain." Her voice softened. "I'm not accustomed to sharing influence." Before he could respond, the session adjourned for a final break. Valora gestured subtly for him to follow her. She led him to an observation lounge overlooking the endless void. Ships glided past like silent constellations. The crystal walls glowed with starlight. Valora stood by the window, expression unreadable. "Your people are concerned about you spending time with me," she said. "They think I'm manipulating you." Julian stepped beside her. "Are you?" She didn't answer immediately. Her reflection shimmered against the glass, ancient, elegant, infinitely alone. "I've been thinking," she said at last, "about what you said earlier, that loneliness isn't surrender." She turned toward him, and for the first time, her gaze wasn't guarded. "For 6 centuries I cultivated distance. Fear kept others from approaching, and it kept me from forming bonds that time would eventually break." Her voice softened. "But you didn't recoil. You didn't bow. You didn't treat me like a legend." Julian swallowed gently. "I treated you like a person." "Yes." A faint, dawning emotion flickered across her features. Something tender, fragile, dangerous. "And now I find myself wondering what it might mean to allow connection." The word hung between them like a star caught in gravity. Julian didn't move, didn't breathe. Valora's voice dropped to something almost vulnerable. "After this summit, when you return to Earth, would you continue our chess games?" Across the light years. "You're asking if I want to stay in touch," Julian said softly. "I'm asking if you're willing to risk being my friend." Julian met her eyes without flinching. "Yes." For a heartbeat, time paused. Then Valora turned back toward the stars, and the faintest smile touched her lips. The closing ceremonies of the summit felt strangely anticlimactic after everything that had happened. Delegates filed into the Grand Hall in an atmosphere of quiet triumph, cautious optimism replacing the tension that had dominated the first days. Agreements that had been stalled for years were now outlined, drafted, and awaiting signatures. Even the notoriously stubborn factions of Titan's Hope and Kestro's seemed almost cooperative. Julian sat beside Valora as he had for every session. For once, no one gave him sideways looks. No one hurried past a row of seats. The buffer zone was gone. Delegates simply accepted it now. Earth's Julian Cross was a human who sat beside the Countess of House Noctis and survived. Valora leaned slightly toward him. "They are relieved this is ending," she murmured. "I can smell it in the air. Fear, yes, but also accomplishment." "That's diplomacy," Julian said. "Everyone terrified, everyone exhausted, everyone pretending they aren't." Her mouth curved. "I find your species' honesty about pretense refreshing." When Earth's turn arrived, Ambassador Richardson stood, and delivered an unexpectedly gracious speech. "Humanity," he said, "thanks all attending delegations for constructive negotiations that have taken place. We are especially grateful for collaborative insights provided by our junior representative, Julian Cross, whose efforts contributed meaningfully to several key resolutions." Julian tried not to look stunned. Valora didn't hide her amusement. "Your leader is finally recognizing your usefulness," she whispered. "I wonder if he realizes he's crediting you for solutions you and I crafted together. He'd probably faint if I told him." "Indeed." As the closing remarks drew to an end, the summit coordinator's hologram shimmered with pride. "Let this be a model for future cooperation," it proclaimed. "Proof that diverse worlds can find harmony through reason." Valora exhaled softly. Reason had very little to do with it. Survival, pride, and your stubborn honesty accomplished far more. "Still counts," Julian whispered. When the ceremony officially concluded, delegates rose to leave the hall. Valora stood as well and turned to face Julian fully. For the first time in days, she seemed almost formal, not cold, but dignified in a way that spoke of centuries of ceremonial farewells. "Thank you, Julian Cross of Earth," she said. "This summit was less tedious than the previous 600. A rare feat." Julian grinned. "Glad I could bring some excitement to your centuries of routine." She extended her hand, a gesture she had never offered any other delegate. Julian took it, feeling the cool, steady strength in her grip. "When you return to Earth," she said, "establish secure communication link. I will expect your first chess move within 1 planetary week. I'll try not to embarrass myself." "You will." Her eyes glowed softly. "But I look forward to it." And then, with the fluid grace of something carved from ancient night, she walked toward the exit, delegates instinctively clearing a path. But this time, the space she left behind did not feel empty. 3 weeks later, Julian sat in his Earthside quarters, surrounded by reports and after-action reviews. The summit's achievements rippled across the diplomatic channels. The joint Kestros, Titan's Hope mining venture, had been formally approved. Multiple micro-agreements drafted by Julian and Valora were being adopted across several systems. Ambassador Richardson was openly considering nominating Julian to lead Earth's delegation to the next summit. Julian wasn't sure how to process any of it. Then his communication terminal chimed. A transmission request. Origin, the outer veil. Encryption, Noctis level secure. Julian's heart jolted. He opened the message. A holographic chessboard materialized in the air, a single move already made. Below it, glowing in faint crimson script. Your move, diplomat. Also, a certain Centauri trade minister has just discovered that his exclusive shipping contracts were not as exclusive as he believed. I may have mentioned a detail or two to the right individuals. Accidentally. Julian laughed out loud. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the galaxy momentarily lighter. He made his move, added a message asking for the amusing details of her accidental sabotage, and transmitted the reply. Outside his window, Earth rotated slowly in its quiet corner of the universe. A small blue world surrounded by vast, complicated systems, all struggling, bargaining, arguing, and occasionally finding common ground. Julian had always believed diplomacy was about avoiding conflict. Valora had shown him something deeper. Sometimes diplomacy was simply choosing to see people, truly see them, regardless of species, legend, or the centuries they carried. Sometimes connection mattered more than treaties. Sometimes one unexpected friendship could shift the axis of an entire summit. He sealed a message and sent it into the stars. Somewhere in the distant veiled systems, a 600-year-old vampire diplomat would receive it, and maybe, just maybe, feel a little less alone.